Okay, so we are live on Facebook, and now I'm going to open up the webinar so folks can join. Okay, welcome everybody to our virtual speaker event tonight with Jocelyn Akins from Cascades Carnivore Project. To start off the night, I'm going to read a land acknowledgement that Wenatchee River Institute put together with the Pasquosa people, who are the indigenous peoples who were the original stewards of this land. The land Wenatchee River Institute sits on is in the heart of the ancestral homeland of the Shim-Pashquashu, Pasquosa, or Wenatchee people. The Shim-Pashquashu, meaning people in between, had villages positioned along the Wenatchee River. Their ancestral homeland extends from the Cascade Ridge throughout what is now known as the Wenatchee and Okanagan Valleys. The culture and economy of the Pasquosa people centered on fishing. They also gathered roots and berries and hunted game. The Pasquosa are named within the Yakima Treaty of 1855. Language to establish the Wenatchee Reservation was never followed through, even with the needed surveying completed. Many Pasquosa now live on the Colville Reservation, 150 miles northeast of Leavenworth. The Pasquosa people are still alive today. They continue to practice their culture within their homelands and are working to get land back within their ancestral homelands. The Pasquosa people are the original stewards of this land. We offer this land acknowledgement as the first step to the continual work of amplifying Indigenous voices and recognizing the harm done to them as a people. We encourage all to learn more about the Indigenous peoples who originate from where you call home today. So I'm Rachel Bishop. I'm the Community Programs Manager at Wenatchee River Institute, and we are a nonprofit in Leavenworth, Washington, and our mission is to connect people, communities, and the natural world. And we do that through two separate types of programming. We have our youth programs, and today, mostly that's happening through virtual education with schools. So we are doing virtual ed and virtual field trips with teachers throughout North Central Washington. But we are also starting to do small in-person programming with kids on our campus. We're doing day camps and then this week and next week it's happening on Mondays and Wednesdays. And the next 2 weeks it's going to happen on Mondays and Tuesdays. And that's with 8 students, all outside. We're wearing masks, we're social distancing, and we're connecting with the natural world. And for our community programs, we are starting to bring back small in-person programs. So prior to now, we were doing all virtual, but definitely check out the calendar because we do have some in-person programs coming in the future. And those will be similar to our youth programs, all outside. We'll be masked, we'll be social distancing, but once again, we'll be connecting with the natural world and connecting with each other, which I know myself and everyone else at WRI is really looking forward to that. So just a couple upcoming programs. First off, there's a lot coming up, and I'm not going to talk about everything tonight because it will use up too much of Jocelyn's time. So I highly recommend folks sign up for our e-newsletter, which comes out twice a month, and it lists many upcoming programs and things that are going on at WRI. And also you can just head to our website, which is www.wenatcheeriverinstitute.org, and check out our calendar, which is the most up-to-date place to check out what's happening. But just to mention a couple coming up. So right now our speakers are still going to be virtual. So there's 3 coming up I just wanted to mention briefly. On March 18th at 12 p.m. we're going to hear about the Cosmic Crisp apple, which was created from a woman named Kate Evans who lives in Wenatchee, and it took over 20 years to create that apple. So you can come and listen to the process of creating an apple and everything about the Cosmic Crisp specifically. And then on April 14th in the evening, just the same as this at 6:30 p.m., we're going to hear from our community's Northwest Avalanche Center avalanche forecaster, Matt Promomo, and he's going to be talking about this season's crazy winter in our mountains and that persistent weak layer we experienced. And yeah, I highly recommend. This is the 3rd season that Matt is joining us to talk about our snowpack, and that's on April 14th. Not on the calendar yet, but mark your calendars. And on April 15th, we are having a virtual storytelling night. So there are 8 community members who are going to join us through Zoom and share some stories they have. And our theme for that night is discovery in nature. And 2 more things. We have a workshop coming up in April that is a wood burning class. So Crystal Baylor from Moss Tangle Arts is going to be teaching us how to do some wood burning. And if you sign up for a ticket, she will mail you all of the materials needed for the class. And then lastly is just a quick update about our annual Spring Bird Fest. This year it is happening and it will be hybrid. So we will have a mixture of virtual programming and in-person programming. And you can find more updates on everything, including Bird Fest, on our website. And if you have a question during our event tonight with Jocelyn, if you're watching through Facebook, you can type it into the comments of the live video. And if you're in the webinar, you can use the chat or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And please type your questions throughout the presentation with Jocelyn, and I will make sure your questions get asked at the end. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight so that she can get started. Okay, Jocelyn leads the Cascades Carnivore Project, an NGO based in Hood River, Oregon, that conducts research and monitoring of rare montane and forest carnivores. Jocelyn received her PhD in conservation genetics from the University of California, Davis. Since 2008, Cascades Carnivore Project has been studying the natural recolonization of wolverines in Washington. Over the past decade, they have detected 9 individual wolverines from Mount Rainier National Park through the U.S. Forest Service wilderness areas south to Mount Adams. Wolverines are extremely rare in the U.S., and there may be fewer than 50 individuals in Washington. Tonight, Jocelyn will be talking about the project's recent successes at Mount Rainier, their ongoing work throughout the South Cascades, and how you can join their efforts. So thank you, Jocelyn, and I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that introduction. Let me just share my screen. All right. Does that look good? Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening to talk about Wolverines. That was a great intro and sums up a lot of what's been going on with us in our work. But tonight I'm going to talk about the return of Wolverines to the Cascades, which is something that we've been working on for over a decade. And to give a little background on myself, a little more background, I'm a wildlife biologist and I grew up hiking in the Cascades, spent a lot of time on Mount Baker and that part of the woods. And I've been living and working out of Hood River, Oregon since 2006. And I've been studying carnivores for most of my career. I've studied such species as grizzlies and black bears, wolverines, red foxes, in places like the Canadian Rockies and in Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks, and in Belize. I've studied jaguars. In 2008, I set up shop in Hood River, and I founded Cascades Carnivore Project as a small effort to investigate the presence of a wolverine in southern Washington and determine whether wolverines were expanding outside of their official distribution. Upon returning home from working on the Absaroka Beartooth Wolverine project, which is in the eastern part of Yellowstone in Montana, I learned that there was a wolverine that was detected on Mount Adams by the Yakama Nation in 2006, and I was totally intrigued with what was going on there. I was curious whether this was a lone dispersing individual in search of a mate, or whether it represented an undetected population. And so I went to the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I designed a small study. And with a small group of friends, really, we started setting camera stations that year. And after 15 months of painstaking effort, trying to get as far into the mountains as we could, and checking these stations, we finally detected a wolverine, and we continued to detect this wolverine in 2009, 2010, and 2011. And it really did appear to be the same wolverine based on photographs. It occurred all around Mount Adams. We found it, and into the Goat Rocks wilderness south of White Pass there. Now our work has greatly expanded beyond that early shoestring effort, and we are currently studying many rare species that occupy Washington's Cascade Range, such as the Cascade red fox, which you can see two kits here. The Cascade red fox is only found in Washington's Cascade Range. We are a conservation science non-governmental organization, and we collaborate with other organizations, and we work with government land and wildlife managers and universities to better understand the issues facing carnivores of conservation concern in their ecological communities. So wolverines are pretty intrepid animals that live in the beautiful wild places where many of us enjoy spending time. They are a member of one of the 5 terrestrial carnivore families in North America. They're a facultative scavenger, meaning that they spend a lot of time scavenging, but they will also kill prey when there's an opportunity. They have a circumpolar distribution in the Northern Hemisphere, so they're found throughout Northern North America, Scandinavia, Russia, Mongolia, and China, where they're often found in tundra, the boreal forest, throughout the boreal forest, and in mountain ranges. And in the lower 48, they occur in really small numbers in the Western mountains, so the Cascades and the Rockies. Wolverines defend a territory. Typically 1 to 3 females occurs within a single male territory, and these females tend to avoid each other. So here you can see on the map, there's 3 wolverine territories from the North Cascades Wolverine study that was conducted during 2005 to 2015, so for a 10-year period. And the red and the yellow polygons are 2 female territories. And you can see that they're nestled within the blue polygon, which is a male territory. So that is typically how wolverines set up shop on the landscape. And 2 is pretty typical, but you could have 3 females in there. The male could have a bigger home range. You could have just 1 female, and it really depends on what's going on with the population, what the density of wolverines on the landscape is. Wolverines are small. A large male can weigh 35 to 40 pounds. That's a big wolverine, but they maintain these huge territories. In this study in the North Cascades that this data is from, some of the larger areas that a wolverine used were over 500 square miles, so really large. And they occupy these vast areas of the rugged terrain of the Cascade Range in order to find enough food to survive the harsh winters in the mountains. Okay, a little science here. So wolverines were extirpated from Washington by the early 1920s, meaning they were totally wiped out, and it was likely due to overharvest and predator control programs targeting other carnivores such as bears and wolves. And you can see in the top row of that table, in the 1921 to 30 period, there was no wolverines detected by anybody, no verifiable observations of wolverines. And to give credit, this table here was from a study that investigated their historical presence. So they went back and looked at museum records and any kind of other evidence that they could find. And so after 1921, there's just no record of wolverines in Washington until the 1960s, when they started to appear on the landscape again. But that was really just a blip that happened in the 1960s, and their numbers were very low throughout the subsequent decades. But by the 1990s, carnivore biologists realized that the wolverine had made a natural comeback in Washington. There is a database of verifiable wolverine observations for Washington maintained by the Forest Service, and it records all reported observations by researchers or the public that can be verified with a photograph or some other evidence such as DNA. This and the following few slides were shared with me by these Forest Service biologists, Kathy Rayleigh and Keith Aubrey. So during the late 1990s, there was only 3 verifiable records of wolverines in Washington. Here you can see where they are. They're all in the north, one not too far from Leavenworth. And this map here illustrates the situation from 2001 to 2005, which was right before we got started. There was just a smattering of records in the North Cascades, but you can see this one record down at the bottom on Mount Adams on the Yakima Nation. Interestingly, 10 years after that, so during 2011 to 2015, wolverine verifiable observations really picked up. It was quite an exciting time. The blue circle at the top there marks where wolverines were captured and collared for the North Cascades Wolverine study that had started 5 years earlier. So they were starting to get wolverines and putting collars on them and figuring out where they actually occurred on the landscape. This study also had some of those detections outside of the blue circle as the wolverines moved away from where they were trapped. The U.S. Forest Service also began a new monitoring effort at this time on the Clay Elm Ranger District, so south of the Alpine Lake Wilderness. It was just really nestled right up against the wilderness boundary. And also at the same time, Conservation Northwest, an organization out of Seattle that I'm sure many of you likely well know, they began setting camera stations in the Central Cascades as well. And the public was also reporting their sightings and providing evidence such as a photograph. And then here another 5 years later, so 2016 to 2019, you can see observations were increasingly being reported. And the original population that was once in the Cascades was now gone, but it had been replaced by wolverines moving south out of British Columbia and Alberta. The Yakima Nation wolverine documented on Mount Adams in 2006 was way outside of where wolverines were known to be distributed at the time. Their official distribution was considered to end in the south for North America at the North Cascades. So Cascades Carnivore Project was started really to monitor wolverines at the southern range periphery in Washington. Back then we were mostly focused on Mount Adams, but our study area now consists of all suitable wolverine habitat south of Interstate 90 in Washington's Cascades, and comprises Mount Rainier National Park in the blue and 4 Forest Service wilderness areas. So the Norse Peak there, William O. Douglas, the Goat Rocks Wilderness, and the Mount Adams Wilderness. the purple polygons, and the surrounding lands on the Okanagan, Wenatchee, and the Gifford-Pinchot National Forests. You can see Ellensburg there up in the top in I-90. It's the red line there. These are monitoring stations. The hexagons in green and orange are monitoring stations over the last 2 winters. So the reason that I started monitoring wolverines was that I was interested in understanding if there was a wolverine population. Was it newly formed? Where did the wolverines come from? Or had there been a small population around undetected for a long time? And how was climate change impacting wolverines at this southern range limit? So to begin answering these questions, we set camera stations high in the mountains and collected DNA samples. In 2018, a decade after we began our study, we documented the first reproduction of wolverines south of I-90 in Washington in modern times, when we discovered a wolverine family and their den on the William O. Douglas Wilderness. And here is the females and her 2 kits. So that was pretty neat to discover. Here you can see her den site in the red square there. The den was located really high up in the mountains in a really remote part of the Cascade Range. We weren't surprised that that is where she located it. It was really well protected from human recreation. It was one of only 3 wolverine dens documented in Washington since the natural recolonization began. It's also one of the only dens discovered in North America without capturing and collaring a wolverine. It's a really beautiful landscape up there, as you can see. So here's the den when we visited in June. It was a really neat spot. There was this low cavity that ran deep under these boulders where the woman in the middle is looking in there. It was really well protected. The wolverine mama would have dug down into the snowpack sometime in February to excavate this site. The official birthday of wolverines is Valentine's Day. Females give birth in a den that's protected deep under the snowpack sometime between January and March, with mid-February being pretty typical. So we like to say wolverine kits are born on Valentine's Day. And a den will be located at the base of the snowpack where there's some kind of structure, like these boulders. You can see the down logs. It could be under talus, or in the North Cascades, one of the dens was located in an avalanche chute where there'd been a lot of trees that had come down and created a real pile of protection for them. So they don't dig into the ground, but rather they use the snowpack as protection from predators and for warmth. So to understand how stable the population is, our research is aimed at understanding if wolverines here are reproducing at a rate that will sustain a healthy population. We hope to detect virtually every individual living in the South Cascades and see who is reproducing, how many offspring they are producing, how well the kits are surviving over time, and if the kits are surviving to reproduce themselves. We want to know if the population is growing, if it's stable, what's going on there. So to accomplish this, in 2017, we began deploying integrated wolverine monitoring stations that were designed to identify individual wolverines based on photography of their unique chest and throat patterns, and determine the sex, and also they're able to determine the sex and reproductive status of these individuals without capturing and handling them. So just to explain this illustration here, so you have 2 trees on the outside of the image there, and then on the left tree you have what we call the run pole, and it will be a tree that we cut in the field, or it could be a 2x4 that we secure horizontally off the tree and we brace it at the bottom. And then we have these two things that we call uprights, which we secure at the end of the run pole. And on the back uprights, we have wire brushes pointing inwards. And on the front run pole, it's just two wooden uprights that have a crossbar at the top. And what this allows to happen is that in order to get as close to the bait as possible, which we've cabled between the two trees and we hang above the uprights, as the wolverine comes along and it puts its paws on the top of the uprights, it looks up at the bait, and we have a camera over here on the right tree that takes photographs of their underside as they expose their belly. And we also have this camera on the ground that we use to target other species that aren't arboreal that we're interested in, primarily the Cascade red fox. We have a little bit of bait on the left tree down at the bottom there that brings in those species down low. So this is what we're aiming for, photographs like these. The wolverine climbs the tree and it walks out onto the run pole, raises its head and paws to display its chest and belly. We have documented wolverines across the study area this way. Here are two of them. So you can see they have very different chest blazes. The one on the right is the female we documented in 2018. In the red box, you can see she has enlarged teats. This shows, this is how we knew that she's lactating and that we should try and find her den. So at the very end of 2019, just as New Year's was rolling around, in Mount Rainier National Park, we documented a wolverine new to the South Cascades study. It was not one of the 6 wolverines we had documented during the past decade. From genetic samples, we later learned it shared the same genetic lineage with wolverines from the North Cascades. So it had likely crossed the checkerboard of logged and restored landscapes at Snoqualmie Pass to make it to the protected habitat of Mount Rainier. I-90 is a significant road barrier in the middle of the Cascades, as many of you know, for wolverines and for many wildlife species. It creates a really challenging link for connecting wolverine populations in the north and the south. So it's with hope that we see wolverines successfully crossing this major highway. It feels like a big deal. Here's a short video of this new wolverine. She's actually sniffing because we are approaching the station. This is about 5 minutes before I got there. And they actually have an organ in their mouth that they can use to smell as well as their nose. And so she got our scent and there she is taking off. All right, so we first detected, oh, I didn't mean to say she, but spoiler alert. In mid-February, so we first detected this new wolverine at the end of 2019. And then in mid-February, this new wolverine showed up again at the same monitoring station, and we determined that it was a female, and it was indeed lactating, making her the second documented reproductive female south of I-90. We nicknamed her Joni since she was found near Paradise in Mount Rainier. And you can see in the photo here, or you can imagine, you can see that there's teats there in the fur on her belly. Wolverines were first documented for the first time returning to Mount Rainier in 2017 when we detected a scat collected at a pika colony on the eastern edge of the park that was confirmed to be wolverine. But this female means wolverines are breeding in the park and not simply dispersing through. And from the pattern of her repeated visits to the monitoring station, she came through the early winter and she didn't show up for a while. She came in mid-February, which we believe is right before she probably gave birth. So from this pattern of her showing up, we could tell that her den wasn't very close, but that it also wasn't overly far away either. And so that it was likely inside the park. So we began to work to figure out which direction it was located. But COVID hit soon thereafter, and we were really limited by our ability to work in the park. And so we did never locate her den, but we tried. But in June, Joni visited a second of our stations at Mount Rainier, this time bringing her 2 young kits. They have now been documented as recently as this past December. So we know that they've made it through those early months of their life when mortality is highest, when they're really small and not very mobile. So we're hopeful for their long-term survival. This is Joni. She's pulled down that hanging bait, and it's she's ready to figure out how to take it home by only using her mouth. That was a good piece of bait for a wolverine. So we were lucky enough to actually see Joni in May moving between what we presume to be her den site and our monitoring station. And this is just a video that we got by my field lead, Scott. It was pretty impressive. It was actually quite a steep slope, and just to see her just cruising, that's something that took us 20 minutes to get back up. She cruised up in about 60 seconds or something. Well, this is a great slide to illustrate where wolverines live. So wolverines inhabit subalpine parkland throughout the South Cascades, as you can see all in the foreground in this photo from Mount Rainier. The landscape around treeline provides opportunities to forage on voles and mice and gophers in subalpine meadows, to scare up snowshoe hares that are resting in stands of mature high elevation conifers, to capture hoary marmots and pikas in talus slopes, and to seek out mountain goat carcasses found at the base of cliffs and avalanche chutes. Wolverines also descend to lower elevations to find elk and deer during the harsh, that are killed during harsh winter storms, cold snaps, or killed by large predators or by humans. We have begun a new and challenging project to assess the effects of climate change on key wolverine prey and to determine how their relationships and interactions with other carnivore competitors may be shifting as the mountains warm. For example, the subalpine meadows that they rely upon are being diminished by the encroachment of trees, and snowpack is being lost earlier in the spring, presenting an opportunity for carnivores such as coyotes that typically occur in the lowlands during the winter to move up or into the mountains earlier and compete for resources. As part of our community science project, we are collecting scat samples from wolverines and other alpine carnivores. We send these samples to Oregon State University for DNA metabarcoding. And this is a genetic technique. It's pretty neat. It allows us to sequence all of the prey species within each scat sample and identify the intricacies of wolverine diets as it varies amongst individuals and times of year throughout the Cascades. We would like to understand what are the key prey species that they rely upon, and how are these prey populations predicted to be affected by climate change. Here's an example of some of the data. So each sample from the field has a field ID that's in bold there. So you can see the first one starts with 2018-05-15. That was a sample that was collected on May 15th, 2018. And below that, you can see the DNA reads for the various species that they found inside the scat. So the first one is beaver, and then wolverine and deer. So we can confirm that it was a wolverine scat because it had wolverine DNA in it, and that it had eaten a beaver and some deer. This is nitty-gritty science, but it's pretty neat that you just start piling up every single scat that you collect. You can send it, you can verify that it's indeed the species that you're interested in, and you can really confirm the whole variety of prey that this carnivore that you're interested in is preying upon. On October 8th, 2020, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service declined to list the wolverine as endangered or threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Many Wolverine biologists believe good science was ignored. And while there's no empirical estimate of their numbers in the lower 48, it is thought to be as little as 300 individuals. The listing decision employed a short-term definition of, quote, foreseeable future when they considered the impacts of climate change that had been, there'd been a longer consideration of time previously, and they determined that climate change would not adversely affect Wolverine populations. However, wolverines are considered a snow obligate species because they use the snowpack to den and to refrigerate their food for long-term storage. They also rely upon cool temperatures, so they are particularly sensitive to climate warming. So the state of wolverines in Washington is still poorly understood. Well, we know they occupy much of their historical range in the state now. Whether the population continues to grow 30 to 40 years now since their return is really unknown. We do not know the trend in the population. In the South Cascades, we went from a single male on Mount Adams to reproduction a decade later. However, if you'd asked me in 2019, before the arrival of Joni, things looked pretty bleak. We only had one male that was known to us after the 2018 female and her kits had stopped visiting our monitoring stations. We never documented them after the summer of 2018. So it's possible that they died, or perhaps the mom had injured herself and died and the kits were not able to survive. So we just don't know what happened with that family, but it's quite unlikely that they would have shifted their territory. It's not something that they typically do without pressure from other wolverines. Following the arrival of Joni, we documented a new male in the Goat Rocks last summer. So that was pretty exciting. This is a huge contribution, another huge contribution to the gene pool. There you can see, I don't know if you can see, but he's a male. You can see his testicles there. And then interestingly, really recently in early 2021, just in January, a snowmobiler shared with us this Wolverine track from the south side of Mount Adams. Wolverines had not been documented on the volcano since 2016, so this report may mark the return of Wolverines to the mountain. We'll hopefully document this individual soon at one or more of our monitoring stations that are active this winter. Along with Joni's two kits, which are both males, and the new male in the Goat Rocks, this population is slowly growing. However, there are no other females than Joni. New females will need to cross I-90 to arrive here and to help expand the population. So where do we go from here? We have a Wolverine population showing up again in the Cascades after a long absence of more than 3/4 of a century. How many are there? Is there an upward trend across the Cascade Range? We'll continue to monitor individuals and document breeding and breeding females and their offspring. But how can we make sure that they don't disappear? These are the challenges that we face. We have these amazing creatures right in our own backyard, and our goal is to figure out what they require to survive and thrive so that they can always have a home here. So please consider joining our citizen science program. We are sorting right now this winter and archiving over 1 million wildlife photographs. And we will be out this summer deploying camera stations and collecting carnivore scats. You can reach out to us on our website. Please also get in touch if you come across Wolverine tracks this winter or are lucky enough to see a Wolverine or a Cascade red fox. I want to say thanks to all our partners. These are other folks doing Wolverine research with us or elsewhere on their own in the Cascade Range. And I'm going to share now a little video, just a little teaser of a video that we produced this year.
In the harshest blizzards of winter, they are up there living, surviving. We want to know how they're doing that.
Mount Rainier is a key habitat for Cascade red fox.
Cascade red fox is endemic, which means that it only occurs in Washington. They live in mountain ecosystems in subalpine parkland, so at the top of the forest before the real alpine areas start. Because of the geography of the Washington Cascades, they have become the most unique genetically among all red foxes. Having the full complement of species in the ecosystem, it's a measure of the intactness of the world around us. There's no way we could collect the number of samples, work in the number of areas without these incredible volunteers.
Do you like to hike, and will you pick up poop?
Okay, I'm gonna pause it there. I gotta figure out how to get to the next slide here. Hold on one second. Okay, so that was a film that we did to highlight our collaboration on Cascade Red Fox ecological research at Mount Rainier, but it was produced to engage all of those community scientists interested in helping us with our carnivore efforts throughout the Cascades. So there's opportunities outside of Mount Rainier. I just want to thank our sponsors, our funders, our collaborators, and please consider supporting us. Your financial support and contributions of your time are greatly appreciated. And I'd be happy to answer questions now.
Great, thank you, Jocelyn. You can leave this screen up for a little bit so folks can write down the website and stuff, but then at some point go ahead and stop sharing so that we can see you for answering questions. So there are a couple of questions coming in, and folks definitely type in more questions that you have from the presentation. But one question, you mentioned that the Joni must have come over or through I-90, and so I'm curious, I know the DOT has cameras on the overpasses, and are there any pictures of Wolverines using their new bridges and stuff that could be Joni?
No Wolverines have been documented by the cameras yet. So there are places that they can cross that aren't the focal areas or the new overpasses. We are waiting with bated breath. There's a photo of what looks like a fissure. So they're starting to build up their database of other species, but no Wolverines yet. Well,
hopefully soon.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was a question at the beginning. I'm just trying to get to it. And it was about the map that you showed, and there were some female Wolverines within the habitat of the male Wolverines. And so there was a question about, are the female Wolverines in the male's territory mating with that male?
Yes. Yeah. So the male defends the territory from other males, and he breeds with the females inside his territory. Yeah.
Great. Okay, and it looks like we have a hand raised by Diane. So Diane, I'm going to let you talk, and you can ask your question. And Diane, you have to unmute yourself, which you should have the power to do.
Sorry, it wasn't me. I don't know what you saw.
Okay, we will unraise your hand. Okay. Great. Let me get to these questions. Okay, so you mentioned that there are about 50 Wolverines in Washington. How many Wolverines do you believe the Cascades could support?
It's a good question that I do think quite a bit about. It's hard to say. There is not Wolverines have these huge areas, and they are expanding over a lot of them. Probably several hundred, but it's hard to know. Certainly in other places, like where you saw those two females on top of the male, in other places like in Scandinavia, you'll see 3 females. So you can imagine things packing in a bit.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so Dina or has a question of what is the lifespan of wolverines and what is the age of reproduction?
I mean, they can live 10 to 15 years in the wild, quite a bit longer in captivity. An old wolverine would be 10, 11, 12. We have some documentation of that, of specific wolverines. Like there's a wolverine that you might have heard of that showed up in the Sierra Nevada named Buddy. He's over 10. We weren't totally sure about our Mount Adams wolverine, but he could be 10 or 11. And there's one in the Willawas named Stormy that's getting pretty old. I think he could be 11 or 12. They start reproducing when they're 2 to 3 years old. And it really reproduction has everything to do with resources, with food resources. So wolverines mate in the late spring and May-ish, or April, May, June. And then there's delayed implantation. The fertilized embryo is implanted in the fall based on the good condition of the mom. But they always give birth in a similar period of time. And they'll have, depending on the food resources on the landscape, they can give birth every year, but that's rare and doesn't seem to happen around here. It's more like every other year.
Has there been any projects relocating wolverines? Like I know you talked about a lot of natural, moving of the wolverines in the Cascades, but even in other states or anything?
Yeah, not in the lower 48. I couldn't say for sure not in the world, but there's been proposals for Colorado, for California, where it's just going to be really hard for them to return on their own. There's just a lot of unconnected landscapes in there that is hard for them to traverse. And their numbers are so low to the north. So I believe not.
Yeah. Cool. Well, can you describe how you felt when you saw the pictures of Joni with some babies?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. It's just really fantastic to see that things are happening in the population, that you have females that are showing up and they're doing their job and they're having babies, and the babies are adorable, and they're slowly making their way on the landscape. We don't I sort of realized as the words were coming out of my mouth, we don't expressly try to go out and always find a den, because we like to leave them alone. But what we're trying to do is figure out approximately where the den is, so we can understand what denning habitat looks like. And then we also want to set cameras at a distance from the den so that we can identify the kits as early as possible, figure out what their unique chest pattern looks like, collect DNA samples, and see, so that we can monitor the population. And so we were really struggling with COVID, because we just weren't allowed to we were the only researchers that were allowed to actually do research in the park at the time, but we had a lot of limitations on what we were allowed to do. They really didn't want anyone to come and get in a search and rescue scenario, obviously, with COVID. So we just couldn't get very far into the park. So we were sort of desperately hoping that the kits would start coming towards the monitoring station where Joni showed up. But as soon as the snowpack started to melt and we could get driving access to certain places, then we got these cameras set, where we were thrilled to get the kits visiting. And they've actually been seen by, if you wanted to see a wolverine last summer at Mount Rainier was the time for it to happen. Quite a few, not a ton, but quite a few members of the public saw her or them. We got several reports. There's some videos, there's photos, and they were seen on the south side of the mountain, the north side. It was pretty lucky for a couple handful of people.
Yeah, that's so great. And for your the folks on your team to see her while they're out at Mount Rainier, that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, that was incredible, because she was just, we were kind of racing against sunlight, just trying to get back. I think with COVID, we were supposed to be back at 5 p.m. or something like that. And so we were trying to get this, I was like racing to set a new camera, and my field partner, Scott, was scanning the landscape for tracks. And then I saw him like looking, and he looked really like too intrigued. And he saw her, and she was cruising up this large drainage, and she just cruised right by us. And the wind was just perfect, I guess, in that way, so that, she did not see us until it was pretty cool. She came up over this ridge, and then she crossed our tracks. It was like, what the? And I'm sure with COVID, she'd been out all winter with nobody was allowed to go to Paradise. There was no one out there, and she just had the park really mostly to herself, and she just was not in the habit of expecting humans to be around. But my crew, they've seen 3 Wolverines. I think that's right. They've been extremely lucky. I mean, they get out a ton and do an incredible job, but they've had some great rewards for that.
Yes. So, Jocelyn, sort of changing subject to the Cascade Red Fox, are you still doing the Stevens Pass project for Red Fox?
That's right. Yeah. And we just have a really skeleton number of cameras out. But we've been working with the local community, with you guys. We have some people checking one of our stations near Stevens Pass, and we are hopeful. Stevens Pass is where some of the most recent observations of this extremely rare fox that is extremely elusive and really hard to find in the North Cascades. Stevens Pass seems to be a place that it may still be hanging on. So yeah. And we welcome anyone who's interested in joining us on that.
Great. And yeah, if you're a backcountry skier in Stevens Pass area, or someone who hikes around the Stevens Pass area, definitely contact Jocelyn and help out the project, and maybe you could be the person to help find the Cascade Red Fox. How cool would that be?
Rad.
Well, Jocelyn, thank you so much for giving this wonderful, informative presentation, and congratulations on all the great discoveries and work that you are doing. And yeah, the world is a better place. The Cascades is a better place because of it. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight watching. And yeah, get a hold of Jocelyn, look at their website, follow them on Instagram, and get involved. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jocelyn.
Thanks so much. Good night, everyone.
Bye.